Writing. The strangest night of my life began with my boss standing in the middle of a bright conference room at 4 in the afternoon, staring at me as if she had just made a decision that could change both our lives. Outside the glass walls, the city was still moving beneath a clear blue sky, cars sliding through the afternoon traffic while sunlight reflected from the windows of neighboring buildings. Inside, everyone else had already gone home. She closed the conference room door, placed a small velvet box on the table, and looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Then she asked me to do something so unexpected that, for several seconds, I genuinely thought I had misunderstood her. She wanted me to be her husband for one night. Before we continue, if you believe kindness can give people a second chance and that sometimes the person standing beside us is the one who helps us find our courage, please like this video, share it with someone who needs a little hope, leave a comment, and subscribe to Whispered Tales. Your support helps stories like this reach people who may need them. My name was Kieran Vale, and until that afternoon, I had always believed I understood my boss, Serafina Rowe. She was 38, brilliant, disciplined, and almost impossible to read. She had built our architecture firm from a tiny rented office into one of the most respected design companies in the city. People admired her confidence, but very few knew what existed behind it. She never stayed for office celebrations, never spoke about her family, and never allowed anyone to ask about her private life. To most employees, she was simply the woman who could walk into a room and make everyone straighten their backs. To me, however, she had always been something different. She had been the person who noticed when I was struggling after my father's death and quietly adjusted my workload without embarrassing me. She had defended my designs when senior partners dismissed them. She had once found me sitting alone in the stairwell after receiving a rejection from another firm and told me that failure was not a verdict, only information. I never forgot that. I also never told her how much those small acts of kindness had meant to me. That afternoon, she finally told me why she needed a husband for one night. Her grandmother, the only family member who had ever truly raised her, was celebrating her 80th birthday at a private estate outside the city. The woman was seriously ill and had one final wish, to see Serafina settled with someone she trusted. Serafina had avoided the subject for years, but now her grandmother's health had deteriorated so quickly that she had agreed to attend the celebration under one condition. She would bring the man she intended to marry. The problem was that there was no man. Serafina had made the promise months earlier during a difficult hospital visit, believing she would have time to figure something out. Now the celebration was the next evening, and her grandmother's condition had worsened. Serafina's relatives were already arriving from different parts of the country, and among them was her uncle, a man who had spent years trying to gain control over a large part of the family estate. If Serafina appeared alone, he would use it as proof that she was incapable of managing the family trust. I listened without interrupting. Then she opened the velvet box. Inside was an old wedding ring. She explained that it had belonged to her grandfather. Her grandmother had given it to her years earlier, telling her that the ring represented something more important than marriage. It represented choosing someone who would stay when life became difficult. Serafina looked down at it and then back at me. She said she needed someone she trusted, someone who would not embarrass her, manipulate the situation, or treat her vulnerability as an opportunity. She knew the request was unfair. She knew I could say no. And she promised that afterward, nothing would change between us professionally. I should have refused. Instead, I asked her one question: why me? For the first time since I had known her, Serafina looked nervous. She admitted that there were many men who would gladly pretend to be her husband for a night, but none whose intentions she trusted. She said she had watched me for 3 years and knew that when people were frightened, I became calmer rather than cruel. She said that quality mattered more to her than money, status, or charm. Those words stayed with me. The next afternoon, we drove to her grandmother's estate. It was a beautiful place surrounded by green lawns, tall trees, and flower beds glowing beneath the clear daylight. The house looked like something from another century, with wide windows and pale stone walls. As we approached, Serafina's hand trembled slightly on the steering wheel. I asked whether she was afraid of her family. She said she was afraid of disappointing the one person who had never disappointed her. That sentence changed everything. At the entrance, her grandmother was sitting near an open window, wrapped in a light shawl despite the warm afternoon. She looked frail, but her eyes were sharp. The moment she saw us, her face softened. She took my hand in both of hers and studied me carefully, not suspiciously, but almost lovingly. Then she looked at Serafina, and for the first time that day, my boss smiled like a little girl. The family dinner was difficult. Serafina's uncle, Garrick, watched us throughout the meal. He asked questions designed to expose us, trying to discover where we had met, how long we had known each other, and why Serafina had kept our relationship secret. I answered honestly whenever possible without revealing the arrangement. Serafina seemed increasingly uncomfortable. Then Garrick made a cruel comment about her grandmother's failing health and suggested that perhaps Serafina was only pretending to be married because she wanted control of the inheritance. The room fell silent. I looked at Serafina. She had gone pale. Something inside me snapped. I told Garrick that people who spend their lives measuring love in property deeds eventually forget that some things cannot be inherited. I said Serafina had spent years caring for her grandmother while everyone else appeared whenever money was mentioned. I said if anyone had earned the right to decide what happened next, it was the woman sitting at the head of the table. Nobody spoke. Then Serafina's grandmother reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Later, after dinner, Serafina and I walked outside. The afternoon had begun fading into early evening, but the sky was still bright enough to illuminate the garden. She thanked me, and I told her she didn't need to. She looked at me for a long moment and admitted something she had never said before: she had been lonely for years. Not alone. Lonely. There was a difference. She had built walls so high that even she had forgotten what it felt like to let someone stand beside her without wondering what they wanted in return. I told her I understood. My own father had spent his final years believing he was a burden. He had stopped asking for help because he was afraid of being rejected. After he died, I realized how many people spend their lives pretending they need nobody simply because they are terrified someone will eventually leave. Serafina's eyes filled with tears. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the old ring. Then she said something I would remember for the rest of my life. She told me that maybe this had started as an act, but somewhere along the way, she had stopped pretending. I didn't know what to say. She smiled sadly and told me not to answer that night. The next morning, we returned to the estate because her grandmother had asked to see us together. She was weaker, but peaceful. She told Serafina that she had known from the moment we entered the house that something had changed in her granddaughter. She said she had not needed proof of a marriage. She had only needed proof that Serafina had finally found someone who could make her feel safe enough to be herself. Before we left, her grandmother gave Serafina a letter. Serafina read it in the car. It contained no instructions about money, no conditions about the family business, and no demands about marriage. It simply said that love should never be measured by how long someone has known you, but by how gently they treat the parts of you that are difficult to understand. Serafina cried silently. I drove. For the first time, neither of us needed to pretend. Weeks passed after that night. We returned to work and tried to behave normally, but normal was impossible. Something had shifted between us. She no longer hid behind formal meetings. I no longer pretended that I hadn't begun caring for her. We started having lunch together. Sometimes we stayed late discussing designs, dreams, and the strange paths our lives had taken. Then, one Friday afternoon, Serafina called me into her office. The same office where she had once asked me to become her husband for one night. She stood near the window, holding the old ring. She walked toward me and said that she had spent weeks trying to convince herself that what happened was temporary. She had told herself it was gratitude, loneliness, circumstance, or simply the emotional intensity of a difficult night. Then she admitted she had been lying to herself. She placed the ring in my hand. And with a nervous smile completely unlike the confident woman everyone else knew, she reminded me of something she had said that first afternoon. She told me not to say I had never thought of this. I smiled because the truth was, I had thought about it. More than once. But this time there was no arrangement, no family pressure, no pretending. There were only two people standing in a quiet office, both terrified of losing something they had unexpectedly found. I asked her if she was sure. She said she had never been more certain of anything. And that was how the woman who once asked me to be her husband for one night became the woman I chose to spend every ordinary day with afterward. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who believes that love can arrive when we least expect it, and subscribe to Whispered Tales for more stories about kindness, courage, and second chances. And before the ending, I want to ask you for something special. Leave a comment with the words, "Kindness changes lives," if you believe one small act of kindness can change someone's entire future. Years later, whenever people asked how our relationship began, Serafina would smile and tell them it started with a strange request on an ordinary afternoon. But I remembered the truth. It didn't begin when she asked me to be her husband. It began much earlier, in every quiet moment when she chose kindness without expecting anything in return, and in every moment when I slowly learned that the strongest people are not those who never need anyone. They are the ones brave enough to finally open the door and let someone in. And sometimes, the person you are pretending to love for one night is the person your heart has been quietly choosing for years.